Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. Today we are going to discuss a proposal to build a DPW facility. This project will likely come before town meeting in October. Currently, the water department is located in a building on Central Street, and the highway department is in a building on Arch Street. To help us understand what the project details are, I've asked Travis Ahern, our town administrator, to come on and bring us up to speed. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I always count on you for the details and all of the painful information that we all need to have, but somehow it's so hard to, digest, really. So let's hear what you've got.
I'll try to make it pain-free, but there's quite a few details in something this size, obviously. So May 2021 annual town meeting approved the feasibility study, which is essentially fact-finding of a degree to kick off a project this size. Cost of that was about $75,000. It was authorized from taxpayer dollars. The contractor that was procured through that legal process got us to Weston and Sampson, which I've worked with in past communities. I find that they are the best in the field, in my opinion. And they've worked through a number of different things. They sat down, they worked with DPW Director Sean Reese, a number of different individuals, the facilities manager James Keese, myself, on the current and future needs of DPW. So through that process, they put together what they consider to be the program of what a DPW facility would need for the town of Holliston now and in the future. They've made two presentations to the Select Board, one in April and June of 2022, and the final report is available online, as are those presentations. The main findings would be that the two current facilities are well past their useful life. The one on Arch Street, as you mentioned, for the Highway Division, and Central Street for the Water Division have been there for quite a long time. We've not invested a lot of money for reasons that you can see if you look at the report in terms of how those facilities are. A picture paints 1,000 words in this case, and so I would encourage people to look at that report just to kind of see the conditions, because not many people pass them on a daily basis or really see sort of the inner workings of them. Mm-hmm. The major findings of that report were really focused on compliance issues with OSHA and ADA. I know those are acronyms, so Occupational Safety and Health Administration is OSHA. They're regulations that we live by for safety in the workplace. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act of 1999, also has regulations that we live by. Additionally, building and mechanical code issues within those buildings are of concern. So we're looking to potentially increase our operational capacity by having a new facility. We're looking to address and protect the millions of dollars we invest in DPW equipment and vehicles by having a new facility. And again, the picture paints 1,000 words as you see what is in those. So they came up with a program that was about 51,000 square feet of what we would need to put together an ideal facility for Holliston. They then, reverse engineered that to get as small as possible because square footage is money. They got down to 45,000 square feet. About 70% of that would be related to protecting our assets, our physical assets, our vehicles and equipment. And so with that, we feel confident that through the feasibility stage, we know what we need for a DPW facility, and now it comes down to where that could go.
Can I just stop you for one quick second? When you say protect our investment in the what we have, what we own, what do you mean?
The trucks, the rolling fleet. We have a lot of equipment that it requires a town to keep up, snow and ice, those types of things. If those are left outside or not properly maintained, or we don't have the ability to properly maintain those, we end up turning those over, purchasing them more, and we're not getting the most out of those assets that we're investing millions of dollars in, of taxpayer dollars. And so really a focus of a DPW facility in today's day and age is about protecting our investment in assets like that.
We don't have the capability to store them inside or repair them or maintain them. We have a roof that does not act properly as a roof in some instances. We have some of our fleet and equipment that must remain outside because of space. We have a shed that protects materials like salt that is also well past its useful life and may not last forever. And is interesting that it's lasted as long as it has. So there's quite a few of those concerns, right? And then obviously our people who service the town through storms in the winter and a variety of different conditions also rely on these facilities as a base of operations. And so it's important to us too that we're making the right decisions for our people who then are providing services to the town.
And so with that, again, Weston and Sampson looked at what we have in those two facilities, looked at ways in which a combined facility, because tearing down and rebuilding both of those facilities would most likely be far more costly than the alternative of finding a location for a combined facility that has a centralized location. They've looked at sites in which a 45,000 square foot facility could be. And I broke those into a couple different categories in a site option discussion. We had a community forum with the Select Board on August 15th, 2022, and sort of discussed them. So we have the two existing sites that we mentioned, Arch Street and Central Street. We have a couple sites that the town has owned for a number of years now. One is behind Pinecrest. One is across from the commercial area that houses Basil's. It's a wooded area back there. Those sites have been taken in the past for various reasons or owned for various reasons. There's other sites that the town may be able to own at no cost. Axton Cross is one that specifically Weston and Sampson looked at putting the program on top of, overlaid it so that people could see how it would look on that site. And then there's other potential sites in which the town could purchase property, and that happens in some instances. And so we were approached by one landowner who said they'd be interested in selling it, and we asked the Weston and Sampson to look at that as a proper site or as a potential site, and then one that we knew was on the market. The Select Board at the time, looking at this, all of the options that had been sort of discussed and what may need to be discussed with town meeting, looked to say, let's look at, first of all, issuing an RFP so that we understand everything that may be available from the private sector, that somebody may sell a property to the town, so we'll do that. And then also we'll engage the EPA on Axton Cross. It's currently not owned by the town, it's in land court, so the town could own it after land court, although that process has been underway for quite a while. And so those are the two things that we left the discussion, the public forum on the site options with. And so from here, it's really going to be how the Select Board looks to approach the coming town meetings. I don't think there is really an option to say that we'll address this in a few years. I think we're past that point. When you look at the pictures, as I mentioned in the report of the facilities that we have right now, I think we've kicked this can, and I don't like to use that term too often, but we've kicked this can a ways down the road. And so I believe that they're looking to have a public forum, a follow-up public forum after Labor Day, but before the October town meeting, and then they'll address at that time how they'd like to approach the coming October town meeting. So that's where we are right now.
Okay, so what are the risks of not doing the building? I know these two buildings have never been done in my lifetime here, so that's 50 plus years if anybody's counting.
So the risks, are the safety concerns, right? So OSHA and ADA are, for the most part, the role of those two regulations are to protect our people. And so neither of those buildings right now, I would consider them both either grandfathered or, to use a non-gendered term, they're legacy, right? They are not up to code. They are certainly not up to standard, but they are legacy buildings, and so they can exist as they currently are. But they are not, we can't go in and paint and make a couple fixes. These are not salvageable as is. They need to be either torn down and rebuilt, which on those two existing sites is problematic per Weston and Sampson, or torn down and those sites be reused while a new DPW facility is constructed elsewhere.
Okay, how does ADA compliance fit into this? Are we talking restrooms or anything else?
Yes, I mean general access to the building. So we do have some people who would visit the highway department. The highway department services all municipal vehicles that fuel up. The bathrooms certainly would be one of the concerns, but there are others. And then OSHA is really, encompasses ADA and goes far beyond that as well.
I know when you do look at the pictures, you can see that the workspace is rather cluttered, which is, I'm sure by OSHA standards, really bad. So what if we didn't do this? What's the plan B? Just let them lie on the, rot into the ground, fall on the tops of people? What do you do?
I think we're at the stage, I think that question maybe 20 years ago was one that we could consider. At this stage it is, we need to find a site and we need to come up with the future of DPW. And I think really, the questions that can come out of that from town officials that you'll speak to can be about, if if the Arch Street and Central Street sites are no longer DPW in the future, the conversations may be what should those sites be. But if they, one of the possibilities that Weston and Sampson did mention is they could fit the program on the Central Street site, but because of the wetlands and how it bisects the site, it would need to be campus style, where you have part of the DPW building here, another part here with a bridge that overlays wetlands. Now that's not going to work, but they did, in fairness, try to make it work with that site. They did not find that Arch Street could work. And they obviously looked at a few others as well, and they'll look at more when we are done with the RFP. Yeah, I think at this stage it's about we need to find this site, because now that we've done the feasibility, we know what the need is, and the last part is going to be the site.
And the site behind Pinecrest, you're referring to behind Pinecrest Country Club, the golf course?
Yes.
On the side where the clubhouse is, where the driving range is?
So Weston and Sampson, it's more set back than that. Weston and Sampson looked at the ways in which you would access that site, which is town-owned, and they looked at 3 different ways, one of which came out by the driving range, which I think the Golf Course Advisory Committee felt was a bad option. There would always be potentially a means of egress through the lot that comes into Pinecrest and goes up top. I think at any stage that would always have to be a secondary means of egress, because you certainly wouldn't want to commingle 2 different areas of traffic. But they looked at 3 specific ways you would get into that site, so that was part of the feasibility on that one. Like I said, they put a lot of thought into each of these in terms of the pros and cons and the pitfalls. I think access to that site in terms of the behind Pinecrest site is probably the most difficult that they were having to work out.
Okay. So when you have OSHA violations and so forth, don't you have to worry about remediating those at some point?
You do.
You do. What happens if you don't?
Fines.
Fine. Okay. And people themselves that are working there, do they complain? Are there concerns among them that?
Yes, I think we're inadequate in terms of, especially during peak times like snow and ice. We have tried to, from a management side, have access to other areas of rest, since that is not an adequate site at Arch Street. 1750 we've used in a couple of occasions, things of that nature. At the end of the day, these sites are not going to be able to be made into something that's adequate. They are, again, legacy sites, and we do the best that we can.
Okay. So now that we have a picture of what is ahead and all the details of this, then what I'm going to be doing is bringing on local officials who will talk to us about the pros and cons. You've done all of the legwork and given everybody the information, and that's the vital role that staff play, is to get all of those details. But the town officials will come on and we'll talk about those pros and cons and see if we can hammer out some of the issues that continue to puzzle me a little bit about locations and stuff. But at any rate, thank you very much for bringing me and us up to speed on the DPW facility, and we look forward to more conversation in the future.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. All right. Thanks. All right. So now it's time to pick up the subject of the DPW. We know from what Travis had to say in the video that we just, or the piece that we just looked at. We're going to talk about the DPW. I'm going to start with some pictures, and we're just going to talk over those pictures. I just want people to get a feel for what's going on with those buildings. They can also see the report. What was the name of the company that did the DPW report?
Weston and Sampson.
Weston and Sampson. That's all on the website, the town's website, so it's easy enough for them to see the whole thing and see all of the pictures. I selected some of them, but that was about it. So, my big question, we have John Cronin, Select Board, and we have Michelle Zeamer from the Finance Committee. Now, I love it when everybody is on the same page, so do I understand correctly that both boards agree?
We haven't voted.
Okay. 2 of you agree. The 2 of you agree that the buildings are obsolete.
Oh, yeah.
They are obsolete.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if in fact we need to get them, okay, we need to build them, a building or something, we're taking 2 buildings and combining it into one. That's what the proposal is for. And at this moment in time, we don't have a designated site because there's some discussion about where that might be because, frankly, we don't have a lot of town-owned land that is available, right?
That's suitable.
That's suitable for this. That's true. Okay. So, but coming up at town meeting, you are asking for $500,000 to deal with the engineering and environmental issues at the current locations, or the engineering for the future building and the environmental issues of the current locations? I think that's probably more likely it.
That's correct.
Okay. Two locations are?
Arch Street and Central Street.
Okay, Central Street, for people that may not even know that dark brown building's set back there with a funny little sign, that it's the water department. But at any rate, so that's just what used to be part of the fire department, was the foundry. But at any rate, so the goal is to try to take the operation and put it onto one parcel. I think the thing that shocked me the most in reading the report was that I'd never put two and two together. I know it's stupid, but that all of those trucks and equipment were sitting outside all the time.
That's correct.
Summer, winter, snow, sleet, all the rest of it. It was like, it never dawned on me that there was no place to put them inside. What does that do to the equipment? I have to assume that it ages it more quickly.
I would agree with you. It's not desirable. It's a function of what we have too. There is a shed-like garage at Central Street where you can winter out some vehicles or work inside, but the fleet itself is beholden to the weather, as you put it.
They're so huge too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're big trucks. Now, do those big trucks fit in at the highway department for repairs and stuff?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I mean, seriously, they look too big. And when I looked at the pictures and saw the space that someone has to work on that kind of equipment, I mean, there's really not much space. So at any rate, so you're going to seek approval for the $500,000, and at the same time, simultaneously and before town meeting, there's an RFP out there for, what is it?
6 acres?
Private-owned property that may be available and suitable for this project.
Okay, so if I own 6 acres, but in a residential area, that wouldn't work. It'd have to be in
Commercially zoned.
Commercial or industrial zoned.
Correct.
Okay, so if there's anybody who has that kind of situation, and there is an RFP on the town website, then you can submit a proposal. This is what I have for land, and blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Mary, I know you have some questions, but
Yep.
I thought it might be helpful for people to kind of take a brief step back to look at what the DPW is today versus what it was 10 or 20 years ago.
Good point.
There's been an evolution, right? I got to town 30 years ago, and we had a water department and we had a DPW, or Public Works.
Highway department. We had a water department and a highway department.
About 10, 15 years ago, the town voted to consolidate into a single DPW facility. We hired Sean Reese as our first Department of Public Works superintendent. So on paper, things consolidated. Budgetarily, things are kind of consolidated. But functionally, they're not. Operationally, they're still siloed. You mentioned Central Street, the old foundry. I did some research on that property. I believe the town of Holliston built the structure that you were referring to back in 1950 or 1960 in that area. There was also an existing structure called the foundry, which was a pre-existing structure. And over on Arch Street, similarly, they're all older buildings, including the salt shed, which is, I'm sure you're going to show some pictures in a minute, and an environment that was built for a purpose that is no longer a consolidated modern DPW. So both sites, both buildings, both programs, if you will, still operate as silos. They haven't fully merged together as an operational unit like a modern DPW facility that the town envisioned when we consolidated. So we have some unfinished business besides the building, but operationally to merge them, to make them more efficient.
They do swap equipment and that kind of stuff, do they?
I'm not sure there's a lot of overlap with equipment because I'm not
Different
an expert.
kinds of equipment,
That's
too.
correct. A water
Yeah.
department vehicle and water department
Yeah.
foreman or worker has a different job, but
Yeah.
I believe when the snow falls, they all turn into plow drivers.
I actually asked Travis about that, and he said that it would help if they were in one facility. It would facilitate the sharing of equipment.
Yeah. Well, it almost stands to reason for the sake of personnel and the equipment and whatever else that goes back and forth, that you're going to communicate better if you're all in sort of the same area. You know, water people may see something out there that needs to be communicated and say, I'll tell them when I get back, but they don't ever get back to the same location, so it is different.
And don't forget, there's now a grounds crew that'll have their own equipment.
There's that too. Yeah. So what is if we're doing design stuff, then what happens with the timeline? If all of this went forward and, okay, what happens?
I believe the expectation at this point is that by the spring, May of 2023, the Select Board may be prepared to receive design engineering specifications for the new DPW. I know you're going to get into this in a minute, but the location will also be discussed in the spring as part of the overall package for cost on proceeding with this building. And from what I understand, once the location is identified, the work can commence, presuming it's a clean site, we can move ahead with construction relatively quickly, put this product out to bid conceptually next summer, and hopefully have a building constructed within 12 to 18 months.
So we're all the way into 25?
2024.
Okay. All right.
Give or
That's
take.
the 300th anniversary. There we go. Just put in a plug.
Just in time.
Anyway, that would be lovely. Okay, so we can continue to function the way we are for a couple of years. I'm assuming we really shouldn't be functioning longer than that, so we're going to go with the idea that we need to do this. The site, if you get requests, if the RFP is responded to and people give you proposals for the sites, you have to do examination of those sites and so forth. Is that all in place so that can just happen?
Describe what you mean by in place.
Well, okay, so I say I've got a site. Well, somebody's got to go out, measure the site. You've got to check titles. You've got to make sure that it could be used.
Well, speaking as someone who's looked at commercial sites to build potential buildings, it depends on the site. Sometimes environmental work has already been done. Sometimes it's been done because the seller is eager to sell and has already done that work. Sometimes no environmental work has been done. So I think it really depends on the site itself.
But it requires somebody to do some research about these sites before you actually even can say it's an option, right?
Correct. I believe the RFQ the town put out asked for a clear declaration of site readiness.
There we go.
To Michelle's point.
Gap in information there. Okay. So if it comes to you, it's already cleared all of those obstacles. If you get a proposal, it should already be clear of all of those questions about hazardous materials or...
Right, but I think sometimes, yeah, you're right, but I think sometimes like monitoring wells and things are seasonal. You need groundwater.
True.
Although,
you need certain testing done seasonally. Okay, so to some degree, we would hope that any responses you get, you're going to know by town meeting what you've gotten for responses.
because it's October 7th is the RFQs due.
Technically, yes.
Technically.
You mean this fall town?
This October town meeting, okay. Are you going to discuss sites at all at town meeting?
No.
No, okay. So then,
The only thing I think you can expect to see on the warrant is a question, non-binding, and I don't know if you're getting to that.
well, that's where I'm going to. It's kind of like, okay, so we're not going to have any information about the site, but we're going to be asked to cast a vote granting you authority to go ahead and to pursue a site?
No.
No?
No, the binding vote will be on the design, the cost of the design. The non-binding vote will be, would you, member of town meeting, vote to enable the town to procure land towards this process or not? It's not binding. It's giving the select board an inclination from this town meeting if they support spending some amount of money towards the purchase of private land.
Right, if you look at the question, I don't have the wording in front of me, it makes it clear that no land will be purchased until May when that land is identified.
Correct.
What are you really after here?
There is a strong sense from some folks, and I think you've alluded to it, Mary, that any disruption of open space is not good. You know, felling trees or clearing land for any purpose, especially public use, is something that is not usually frowned upon, and I get it. The identified land is part of a very large parcel that abuts a recreational area. some folks have concerns about that.
Let's be specific. We're talking about the land at Pinecrest, off of Pinecrest Street. Prentice Street, yes, Pinecrest Golf Club. But, so we're talking about the land that's up behind, no, we can really, I mean, it's not like it's something that we look at and we think, that's a piece of land. It's a big pile of land back there. But trucks would come out where?
There have been a couple of different options for the trucks to exit. One's through Burnap, and the other one will be through an access road right onto Prentice Street alongside the driving range.
Okay, but the thing is that they would access to Prentice Street.
Correct.
Okay, so it's up behind the golf course, would not interfere with the golf course. That sort of plan was modified so that you were able to move it, as I understood anyway, to get it away from, you weren't going to have to take any of the driving range or anything. So it's in there.
Right, and I think what the board wants to see is if there's an appetite from the town to procure land.
Right, spend the money for private land.
Right. The task done to date has been to evaluate all the publicly owned land that fits the profile of this particular footprint, which I think is between 4 and 6 acres. There are precious few lots that the town owns that are suitable, so consequently we're left with basically a couple of different options, and one of them is Prentice Street. Some folks have talked about additional lots, and I don't know if you're bringing this up in a minute, but one of them is the Axton Cross property, which is currently in land title court. That property, I'm sure Michelle knows this, has been a chronic issue in Holliston for generations. It's a contaminated site. It has been taken by tax title. The town is currently in land court, likely to take it. But if you know anything about land court, and I don't, it takes a long time for any decisions to come out. And it has not been in there that long. I think we went to tax title about a year ago. So we expect some period of time to lapse before the town takes that land. Then the next question is, if that green light was had tomorrow, is that the suitable location given the ground contamination that we know exists and the impact that any construction of this kind of scale would have on that site? We don't know that. So one of the things that we've recognized is that with the limitations of public land or available land, if the town people have an interest in a preferred spot in a commercial zone, which is away from a resident or away from a neighborhood, are they willing to pay for it? Because it's going to be a significant upcharge to the total project cost.
Okay, so we're basically saying, and you can use the term commercial, but commercial industrial, right? Mm-hmm. So it could be something on Washington Street that's owned by a private entity. It could be in an industrial park, right? Okay, we're not talking about like finding 4 acres downtown.
No, I think we're not drawing the perfect picture. We're trying to see what the market's telling us. Mm-hmm. If somebody came to us and said, "Oh, I've got the perfect commercial industrial zone and it's on one end of town," I think the select board would have a critical look at that to find out if that's the actual right site. We want something that features a centralized disbursement, so that whether it's snow or disbursement of workers and resources during the day, they can go out and do their thing without having to traverse the whole town. Centralized is probably preferred, but that's just my opinion.
Okay. I mean, things that come to mind, just, like the wild buildings on Summer Street, and the one's being used, but I think the other one's still vacant. I mean, they're big buildings that are vacant and that kind of thing.
Yep.
You have no idea what demolitions would cost, because I'm sure that's what you'd have to do. Right. But at any rate, so you're basically going and saying, this is all we've got for town sites. This is the only other site, Axton Cross. That one's not working so well for us. If we, in fact, keep going, the only place we've got are private sites. What do you think of that? Are you willing to pay to buy a private site? That's basically what you're asking. Mm-hmm. Okay. And do we have any ballpark of what private sites are going for per acre?
So I'm not too comfortable giving a number on that because the procurement is still on the street. Okay. And I don't want to telegraph value, but I think it's safe to say it's in the 7 figures. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about multiple acres. So the area in question would have to be unique and would have to have some value. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a significant upcharge.
Mm-hmm. And that would be factored into whatever the debt is or however we're paying for it.
Correct.
What is the best guess of the cost of the building itself?
Do you have that?
I think we said 500 or 300. 300. Wasn't it 300 million?
No, it's 25 to 30.
Yeah, for the building.
Because I don't have. Oh, right, for the building, yes.
Yeah. So 25 to 30
Right.
plus.
She's
30
right,
million.
it's 500 for the article.
500 for the, yeah, I hit my glass, my distance glasses on, right, 30 million for the facility, not including land acquisition is what I wrote.
Okay, so it's 30
Yeah.
plus. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about the money. So we're best guessing at 30 plus whatever the land is. You're going to ask for permission to, the sense of the board, the committee, or town meeting, as to whether or not we're willing to spend money to buy a private site. And now we're going to go forward, and we're looking at a timeline of 2024. But how do we pay for this? I mean, are we borrowing? I believe that there's a difference of opinion between the two, the finance people and the select board, or is there not?
We haven't taken a vote, so we have no opinion.
Well, there's been a working group,
But,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah, I
that's
was
what
gonna
you're
say
referring
that's-
to.
Yeah,
And-
I'm referring to the working group.
Yeah, that's our collective wisdom. We all have differing opinions. The benefit is Holliston has zero debt right now. We don't have, we're not saddled with payments for bond projects that happened recently. So we recognize that we have an opportunity to invest in our infrastructure, and the DPW facility is part of that. How do we pay for it? Well, this will likely be a bonded project one way or another. The question is, how much do we put against outside levy funding, which would require an override? And if that is the case, one can imagine we'll work as hard as we can to reduce the impact on the taxpayer by using existing resources, but how much that is, as Michelle said, we're not voting on that right now.
Right.
I think that's more process related. I don't think there'll be a lot of disagreement over it. It's just what's going to be the most optimal condition.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to translate that for people who don't spend their time in here, thinking about our money situation. So there will be an override for some amount of money.
Likely.
We are talking about trying to find cash, if you will, that we are able to scrape together within the levy limit, which means, money that's available. And that would be
through
sort
raise
of
and appropriate action.
through, and that would in essence be our down payment on whatever this loan is going to be to try to reduce the amount that we're borrowing. Okay. Interest rates are up. This is not good. What are they? How are they doing for municipal entities? Has that changed a lot?
I don't know, Mary.
No.
What I can
I'm
tell
just
you
curious.
is that, Holliston is a AAA rated community. We'll fare favorably with
True.
with whatever market rates come our way. And as we know, things change quickly. We're likely not going to be looking at any market borrowing for some time. I'm not an expert in this area, but I know our town treasurer is. And typically what happens as you progress with an RFQ, you'll probably put out a bond anticipatory note, which is a short-term note. And then by the time the construction is underway and you're incurring the large costs associated with the building, that's when you bond. So we're probably a year to two away from seeking the long-term note. And a lot can change before then.
Yeah, unfortunately, to the good or to the bad. But yeah, no, you're right. You're right about that. So also out there are other capital projects that we're talking about. And I think that this is probably going to be the hardest part for officials and for residents that are, or you folks, even when you're casting votes as a resident at town meeting, is wrestling the beast to the ground. That if we're talking about maybe needing some modifications, rehab, or replacement of a high school, if we're talking about however many dollars go into the sidewalk projects that are on the table, and la-da-da-da-da-da-da, how do we do all of that? How do we?
You first.
I was going to say that was a large part of our discussion in the working group.
Yeah.
And
It was the best part of the working
Yeah,
group, actually.
it
It was a
was.
great conversation.
it was, I think that's a discussion we have to have with the school department, with the school committee. I think that a lot of that discussion has to come from the school committee. I don't think that we're going to solve that right now. I don't want to speak for them.
No, I guess I'm just looking at it from the standpoint as a resident that how long is it going to be before we are able to get enough information to even figure out what's appropriate?
Well, I'll tell you what I said in the working group. My fear is I don't want projects to be funded on a first-come, first-served basis. And then we'll get to the schools and people say, I'm tired of these overrides. I would have voted for an override for the schools if they had come to us 3 years ago, but I'm just tired of it. You know, where
How do you avoid that?
you avoid that by setting priorities. I don't know if that's something that the Envisioning Holliston people had looked at, is, you know, what do we want for the town? What are the priorities? Is it schools? Is it sidewalks? Is it, I mean, the DPW, I think, is urgent because of the condition of the buildings, because people work there, the equipment, that has to be done. But something like sidewalks, is it the water mains being done in an expedited manner? Is it, you know, what is the priority? That has to be worked out because those are all projects that take money. They maybe will incur borrowing or, you know, raising tax, you know, an operational override as opposed to a debt exclusion in some cases. But it's up to the town to decide what the priority is.
Okay. Yeah, John. No, sorry.
So Michelle touches on a topic that our working group did have a good conversation about, because, you know, it's important, I think, that we be honest about our own opinions. We don't represent boards here. But in that same conversation, I've come around to the notion that, to Michelle's point, that there has to be a reckoning of what the town plan needs to be for the high school. Let me explain. So for the last 3 years, Holliston has filed a statement of interest with the school building authority with the state. And I voted for them each time. We were informed during the first round by the superintendent that the school is putting in an application that has met certain criteria within our SBAB application. And he said, just be patient, it will take some time. And I remember Brad saying 10 years, and, you know, he was just kind of saying, just be patient. The realization, though, is that when you watch the application go through annually, goes into the process, it competes with dozens of other applications across the state, and then you get the notice, sometimes in the fall, that you didn't win or you didn't get selected to come in, you see what did go in. And you match those programs against your own, and you wonder, how are we ever going to achieve a yes? How are we going to get to a green light on this SOI? Pragmatically, I don't see it right now. And I'm trying to become a little bit more conversant about my concerns with my peers, including Michelle and folks in the Finance Committee through our liaison with the schools, to think more creatively about what the town's expectation needs to be. Because if I was a young parent in town and I heard that we were getting a new high school, I'd latch on to that. That's great news. I'd like my kids to go to a nice new high school. But is that reality? Are we pitching an idea that is maybe more hope than fact? So what I'm hoping for over the next several months following this fall town meeting is to engage the schools, as Michelle said, and the Finance Committee, so that we can come up with a plan to say, look, is the current approach to filing an annual statement of interest the right approach? To annually roll out the same game plan and expect the same results or different results? All the while watching this large capital project basically, you know, position itself in our capital plan as dominant. It's big. And so when you bring up the funding for the DPW or the funding for infrastructure, those things have to be kind of thought of collectively. And when you put them all together, it's very expensive. Broadly speaking, Mary, I know you know this, 20 years ago, this town bonded almost $100 million in the elementary school, the middle school, and the renovation here. And then on top of that, we added a bunch of other projects, and we were fully loaded for 20 years. Mm-hmm. The tax burden that people incurred at that time was high. We measured against other communities and some similar towns around here. We were very similar. My personal goal has always been to keep the tax burden the same, not to see these peaks and valleys where taxpayers see a break, if they do at all, and then boom, they see another increase when people want to start bonding large projects. You should plan your capital initiatives so that all of them kind of flatten in and that the tax burden pays for those investments in a very responsible way. And I think that's where we're going with our thinking. We want to engage the schools to have a pragmatic discussion about when. Is this the right, do you still believe in this project? Is this the right scope? Is it the right scale? Can we do more in terms of planning this particular application to make it more feasible? And if so, what's the realistic time frame? Brad's expression to me 3 years ago was just that, and he's gone. So what can the community expect? And if we all collectively agree on a date or a time or a scope, then we plan. And then we push into the blocks of our capital plan what the town could afford so that rate is flat. And the taxpayers, they see minimal impact, but we all benefit. So it's planning. It's complicated, but it's going to take some extensive conversations. I think we all agree this fall and spring.
I think we discussed maybe suggesting to the schools they hire a consultant to look at what other towns are doing who've gotten MSBA funding and help, see what we need to do. I mean, right now, Keefe is putting in a SOI.
Does that hurt
Keefe
us?
Tech.
Does that hurt us? I mean, if we
Well, they're expanding. They want to expand capacity, which means more Holliston students will be able to go to Keefe.
yes.
They want to expand programs, which means our population might go down.
Our population is just roughly half of what it was, when we
Right,
built this place.
And so I mean, that hurts us when we apply.
Yeah, I
on the
mean, we were
SOI.
over 5,000, and now we're at 2,700. So it's
we'd be applying the same time as, if we don't get this round of funding, the next time we're applying alongside Keefe.
that would be that from a state level, that ain't going to happen. You know what I mean? One town's not going to benefit out of two pockets, so to speak. It just doesn't happen that way.
So,
And vocational, I bet you, wins out over traditional just because everybody is screaming and hollering about vocational schools right now.
What we do know about the program is it's exceptionally popular.
Oh, sure, it always has been.
It's given back a lot to Massachusetts in the form of education. We and certainly in Holliston, we've seen the benefits of it.
Yeah.
But the amount of interest and competition for that same dollar is so intense right now. And you have to measure the quality of your grant or your application against the ones that are actually getting it. And Michelle alluded to one that I think we know about at Keefe, and that's being driven by population.
Well, I was going to say, I've done a little bit of research, not a whole lot, but I mean, from my research, it is generally for places that have a growing population of students or a building that hasn't been updated since the 50s. Okay? And we don't satisfy either one of those criteria.
Or may have some building conditions that are unhealthy.
Well, hazards, yeah, okay. But I don't think we have any of that either. So, I mean, it's like, let me just say, as a former grant writer and somebody who spent her life just evaluating whether somebody was going to be competitive or not, that's the first lesson. You go through everybody who's been winning, and you figure out what they had that you either have or don't have. And when you look at it as detached as you possibly can, no matter how much you care about it, that's the great thing about a consultant, is they really don't care. They're going to get their money either way, but they're going to give you the facts, and they're going to say, okay, these folks, it was all due to, a growth in population. Well, you haven't got that, and I don't see that happening. And, others, and so forth. And at some point in time, you just have to accept the fact that there's always going to be somebody in front of you in line.
Right, and I'm sure that there are deficiencies that could be met with a new school, or with a rehabbed, or with, a new wing put on or something, but we have to find out what those are.
Well, the other bad thing about SBAB is that they're not going to build you a field house, and they're not going to build you an auditorium. So somewhere along the line.
Or a pool.
Or a pool. Well, we don't need a pool.
We remember that.
Yeah, but we have a field house, so if we don't, that's an added cost, and so there's an auditorium.
Right, and I just want to make sure that when we find out what those needs are and how we can meet those needs, the taxpayers aren't overly burdened with other things so that those things could be funded.
Well, I do think that you've said the magic word as far as I'm concerned, is that is what the needs are. And that's something that I think the community as a whole needs to talk about. Right. Because, no one needs a new, shiny whatever. But if there are educational requirements that aren't being met, expectations, they don't have space for this, they can't accommodate the technology, they can't have the right setup of a class space. You know, those are issues that we definitely have to
It's not
tackle as a
aesthetics.
community. It's not about aesthetics. I mean, I think the school looks pretty darn good, even though, yeah, admittedly, it's a different style from, the style will come back. But you know, this would be my third chance to pay toward a high school. You know, I paid for this building and then paid for the renovation for this building, and now I'm going to, you know, yay.
It's not like the DPW, which
No, I've never paid for anything for them. Really. I should feel guilty. I just feel lucky. You know.
But, you know, going back to Michelle's point, and I think this is the sobering reality, is that 20 years ago, the schools got out of the gate quickly. There was a very strong, organized approach to getting our schools fixed, up to date, and certainly the community answered that with a yes to the overrides. It was the smaller projects that came later, and those are the ones that kind of dropped in to accentuate, if you will, our bond capacity. So all things can be done with proper planning, and I think that's the message that our working group, and we feel like we have to spend our winter talking. And it's going to be I think there has to be some sobering discussions about expectations. Timing is important. But there's a realization, as it always has been in Holliston, that our educational investment is probably our most important one. I would add infrastructure and water at the top of it. We have some important decisions to make, but the good news is we have great information surrounding us. We have good studies. We have some very, very detailed information to share. And I'm hoping once we jump into the school arena, we can learn more with them, and perhaps with a consultant or somebody who can help us learn more about how to optimize our opportunity here, and then build on it to make that plan reality. I mean, that's all that has to be the output, a good plan.
Well, I think there are a couple things. One, envision Holliston, the difference in priorities from high to low is a narrow margin. So I don't think it's going to offer quite as much, you know, crystal ball thinking as folks might want. So it is going to come down to the nuts and bolts conversations that we're going to have. And everything, you know, obviously it changes as soon as you put a dollar figure with it. You know, I love this, I love this, I live this, until you tell me how much it's going to cost me, and then I might not like it as much as I thought I did. Right. You know, so I think that it behooves us to always keep the dollars at least in the conversation, not necessarily to just focus on the dollars, though. You know, you want to do it right. You want to get it right.
Mayor, if I could just compliment that story about long-term capital planning. The town does fully embrace a very active 5-year capital plan. Under our town administrator, Travis Ahern, who's done a phenomenal job, I think, and the subcommittee on capital planning, they've put together a very vibrant and active plan, and that's relatively new.
Yes.
It was started about 5 years ago. I believe the Collins Center. Did the Collins Center do that work?
The very beginning
Yeah, I
of it.
think
They started
did,
it,
yes.
and then it went dormant. But since Travis's arrival, it's become a very vibrant extension of our role to oversee our capital projects. And one of the things that I think is important for taxpayers to understand is we'll always have resources within our budget to handle capital needs. When I mean capital, I mean non-bonded. So this is free cash or surplus funds that are used to pay for the plow or a piece of equipment or modest renovations. Those resources will be in place. Our 5-year capital plan looks quite nice. It's balanced. It has a certain rhythm to it, which all plans should. We're looking for something that's a little bit more than 5 years. What's looming into that 10-year period, Mary, where you can reasonably expect a building or something that needs to be bonded to emerge, so that there's no surprises, and that line, that multi-year line is flat. That's the goal.
Okay. Well, there is definitely a lot ahead. The one thing that I would toss out is that no matter where you read, the number one issue for communities is water. And while, you know, I think we need to make sure that we keep our eye on that ball, not just, you know, Holliston, but the whole state and so forth. That is the number one issue that's ahead, because treatment is going to become more and more expensive and be more and more necessary as we are drawing water that doesn't have quite as many, it's not as pure as it used to be, let's be honest, okay? And the volume of it, the quantity of it, unfortunately, is just not there. So that's everything that I read, and I do this
a lot, that's a biggie. So,
Well, to complement that, our water treatment plant is online.
It is?
Well, it's not fully functional. We're waiting for a couple of pieces of equipment that are delayed through supply stream, but it is built, it's up and running. It's going through some testing phases and so
Sure.
forth. That was an $8 million investment to clean the water on that side of town, which is an enormous investment, Mary. And it's going to provide generations of clean water to sections of Holliston that had suffered for so long with
Yeah.
colored water and so forth. The piece that, and I know we're not here to talk about all of that, but the delivery system is the part that is still unfinished. We have
Yeah.
miles and miles of degraded pipe that move our precious resource under our feet every day. And because we don't see it and it doesn't have a natural advocate, it's easy to ignore until you have a problem. So
well, it seems like we have a break a week. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it seems to me there's a break everywhere.
I think I was stuck in traffic today because of the repair of one.
Yeah,
on winter.
No, on Concord.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where you are, that they're even in the neighborhoods. Now, I was always under the quote assumption that, the pipes you really needed to worry about were the Washington, Concord, the main thoroughfares. I don't think that's the case. I think those have been done over the years. They've been dug up more often, perhaps,
Correct.
whatever. It's the poor neighborhoods. It's the ones that were built in the 50s and the 60s that are really starting to suffer now.
We have 60 miles of pipe in the ground, water pipe, and a fraction has been replaced. We're doing 1 mile per year right now.
Yeah. Well, I
And
think
the vast majority are well beyond useful life.
I'm delighted to hear that the treatment facility is online, and I certainly hope we're going to have some sort of celebration over that one, because the folks that
There's a warrant article to do the loop, so that'll...
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot about that. Yep. All right. Well, folks, I think we've beaten this story to death. It's always exciting to talk about, policy and that kind of stuff until, as I say, you start putting dollars to it. And these are big dollars. These are big projects. And these are important ones. I mean, we are talking about the backbone of the town. We really are. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Always.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. And we will catch you folks again next time. Thank you.